Hey guys, I think it was over a year ago that I met with Mike Dubrovsky on the podcast, and they had a superb new test suite available for US and Canada, and a lot of people took advantage of that. But I'm delighted to be back with Mike today, and also a friend, Phil, who was a customer, now working for him, and they've gone way further than the simple kind of heart health tests. They've got a whole end-to-end kind of system for personal health, heart health, and longevity, of course. So great to see you again, Mike and Phil.
Yeah, Ivor, it's great to be back on.
Very good. And I don't know if you want to, in your own words, just kind of give a summary from a high level of what you're currently at and what you'd like to get done.
Yeah, I think I can talk a little bit, and then it's probably better that Phil explains the heart health program because he's leading that. But just as general, background for somebody that didn't hear the first podcast that we did, whatever it was a year and a half ago, CiFox is originally it was a semiconductor company, so we do photonic semiconductors like a silicon wafer up here, and we build blood testing on silicon chips. And the idea is to make it extremely easy to do at home, democratized, very low cost, and then transforming the way preventative medicine is done so that you can basically track biomarkers frequently and act on that before symptoms and so on. So that's like the broad arc, right? And we offer this. Our typical product is like this mail-in test kit. We haven't yet gotten through the FDA with our home device, which is a chip in a cartridge where you can get the results instantly. But what we sell now is like a test kit that you put blood on a card, and it's preserved on the card as serum after it's filtered, which is actually very nifty. So this card will actually filter out your red blood cells and preserve serum dried. And that goes to a lab where we tested for a bunch of different biomarkers. So that's what kind of our mainstay product. And we're pushing further into actually helping people improve their biomarkers. So it's not just tracking. Now we've launched something. It's something we call blueprints. So it's different programs focused on like improving things that we saw in, we do thousands and thousands of tests a month. So we see kind of like what are the issues people have? And one of the major ones was a combination of like metabolic health issues with lipids, like high ApoB, that kind of thing. So like high trig HDL, high ApoB, that nexus. And so Phil can talk more about it, but we basically decided to focus on that as our first blueprints. And Phil's been building it with us for the last 3 months or so. And we recently launched and made it available for beta users. So you can talk more about it.
Sure. And first of all, Ivor, let me just say it's a pleasure to be on your podcast. I'm familiar with your work. I've actually downloaded your book many years ago, and in anticipation of this podcast, I went back to it, and I would say that it's aged quite well, for sure. And so a little background about myself. I'm a MD PhD, so I've spent a lot of time in the laboratory, in the clinic. I trained in internal medicine. I trained in infectious disease. I've actually spent a lot of my career in the drug development industry, and I've worked closely with physicians and healthcare providers who have very traditional training. And I've also worked very closely with healthcare providers and physicians who think and use lifestyle, which unfortunately we can still call as quote unquote non-traditional at this point in time. At a personal level, I'm also very deeply interested in health technology and digital health to help individuals make personalized decisions. And, the long story short is throughout my career, I've done my best to expose myself to people with very different viewpoints and to try as much as humanly possible to keep an open, unbiased mind and to adjust my own belief systems, I think, as I've learned more, which pretty much happens every day. So, as Mike mentioned, I started using CiFox as a customer long before I met Mike. And I recognized this is the mail-in product that Mike said, there are individuals like me who are quite interested in looking at biomarkers to be able to kind of optimize health, and in this case, my own. And it really dawned on me that this is a potential tool that could be used not just for individuals on the quote unquote healthier end of the spectrum of health and disease, but really to really meet participants wherever they are in that spectrum. And so that's a lot of what we're here to talk about. And ultimately, that's what led to the Heart Health Blueprint.
Another reason or an interesting example, just to color why we decided to do heart health first, is that we've had quite a few users who never had their ApoB tested, for example, or some of the other markers like fasting insulin and so on, or even CRP that hasn't been paid attention to. And then they find out through CiFox that, oh, wow, I have an elevated value. Like a great example is somebody who actually left us a Trustpilot review where they measured with CiFox, they found out they had a high ApoB, even though their LDL was normal or close to normal. And they then went to get a CAC scan, and they thought they were healthy. So this guy said he was running half marathons and so on. He found out that he was very, very high risk of having a heart attack, a lot of blockage, and he had to get 2 stents. And now he's back to running and so on. So this kind of thing ends up being really significant for us, and that's another reason why we went for heart health, because we think we can discover a lot more of these people.
Excellent. And that first product, Mike, I must say, it was very popular indeed. I know it was limited to US and Canada. I think it still is.
Yeah, so far, yes, but maybe over the next year we'll be in UK and EU. So we're starting to figure out how to make that work.
Right. And I think it was 18 to 20. It was a lot of laboratory tests for a very nominal price, very high dependability. I remember at the time we talked, it was all tied back to actual laboratory references, and a super product. But now, Phil, you're going to incorporate it into so people can get their tests fed in through a secure system, I guess. And then get potential follow-up with telemedicine or even scans, and basically get the whole service without having to go through the hellhole that is the medical system.
Yeah, and as Mike said, this is a beta launch, and it's based off of the CiFox platform. The different features that we're building into it will be continued to develop over time. But maybe taking a step back and thinking about this at a 40,000-foot view, when I came to CiFox, I personally was very interested in answering the question of how do you turn off this fire hose of chronic disease, which ultimately is the question that we should all be asking, right? And I think one of the challenges that we have in our system is that, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of passionate people who really want to make a difference in people's lives. But ultimately, we have to understand that whatever solution or tools that we're developing, they have to fit the problem. And if the problem is, again, this fire hose of chronic disease, and we can define chronic disease more specifically, but ultimately it has to be shifted from a reactive to a proactive stance. And it has to also incorporate the realization that lifestyle has to be the foundation. Lifestyle has to be the foundation, to be honest with you, regardless of where you are on the health and disease spectrum. There is a place for medicines, but when it comes to prevention, early intervention, disease reversal, lifestyle has to be something that we begin to focus on. One other thing, Ivan, as we've been discussing, there's value in both the way health has been approached in the traditional as well as the more non-traditional sources. And we have to integrate all of these. For example, in the Heart Health Blueprint, the foundation that we start with is the risk over 10 years and 30 years, which is available online through the American Heart Association, which has no affiliation with CiFox. But we help individuals with their data calculate this information and serve as the foundation or the basis for them to begin to make decisions in their lives. But then beyond the risk score, it's about the personalization of this risk. And this is where we know, and there's complete agreement with this, regardless of the source of traditional or non-traditional medicine, that again, as we've been describing, it's about chronic inflammation, it's about disruption in your metabolic disease, and these risk factors are readily available, and these are what we help people understand through our biomarker panel.
Yeah, that's great stuff, Phil, because I've used those very calculators, and it's great in as much as you can to stick with the established, highly researched and statistically or actuarially kind of validated risk factors or risk quotients. I mean, there's Q risk in the UK, there's AstraCharm, there's MESA, of course the AHA one, all very similar, but that's a really good addition.
the other challenge in our system too is it has to be participatory, right? In the end, it can't be take a pill. We have to be able to get individuals engaged in their own health. And in a lot of ways, that's where a biomarker panel that could be done at the right frequency to enable change and can be done in an affordable fashion and convenient as well. All of these have to be solved for in order to create a product that can be used for individuals, that can prioritize prevention, that can prioritize early decision making in whatever tools or solutions they use. And so that was the basis of thinking, let's begin this product, which we're calling the Heart Health Blueprint. And I think that that's what CiFox is really trying to solve for, is the realization that is you can test for hundreds of biomarkers, which there's many companies that allow you to do that. But if you can't do these at a frequency to allow you to make decisions based off the intervention you choose, whether it be a diet, a medicine, et cetera, if you're not doing it at a frequent enough interval and doing it in a place that's affordable and accessible, in this case, we can do this at home. We could do it with a mail-in product, which you never have to leave your house. Then all the innovation in the world and all the technology in the world is not going to have limited use if you can't actually use it. So again, it gets to this point about healthcare has to be participatory, and the individual has to really kind of take the responsibility for understanding whatever they choose to intervene and take that responsibility. Our platform is to guide them with the outputs, which I honestly think are much more well-defined and less controversial. The inputs are much more complicated because this has to do with the individual, their genetics, their interaction with their environment. But ultimately, what really matters is the outputs, the outputs that will. How's this impacting your metabolism? How's this impacting your inflammation scores? How's this impacting not just your heart, but also at a systems level, other organs that are important, your kidney, your liver, et cetera, your hormones that are important for metabolism, like your thyroid, cortisol, which is also an important biomarker when you start talking about dysregulation in rhythms and in balance. And so this is what we've incorporated into a very simple kit that allows people to test on a regular and frequent basis and make good decisions on their health.
Yeah, I think one other thing that might be getting lost there is that basically there's a lot of, like, if you go online, right? So the average person, what are they doing? They go online and they're trying to figure out, like, what do I do? Because my doctor says, like, come back when come back when you're closer to having a heart attack or whatever it is, and then we'll talk. So that's like a very typical, kind of experience that people have. People, if you just go on Reddit / any one of these topics, that's like the top story is that my doctor said, I don't have time to deal with this until it's more serious. And so people go online and there's a ton of different camps, right? So there's the keto, there's the vegetarian or vegan, there's, on like opposite sides of the spectrum, I guess, vegan and carnivore. There's the take statins immediately at the highest dose people. There are the statins are the devil people. It's like everything is available, right? So I think one of the things we wanted to accomplish is, first of all, to take like an unbiased look at what's out there. And obviously Phil's been doing this his whole career, but also, recruit a lot of advisors from different parts of this of this space. So both like, straight from like the people literally publishing on behalf of the AHA, like the American Heart Association, and also people that are, giving talks at COSI, like the keto conference. We actually just attended that conference and had a table there. So it's kind of, looking at the whole spectrum and trying to boil down, okay, what are the things that seem to work, and kind of offer them to people. So for example, universally, like if it appears like you might be, building up plaque, it might make sense to go get a CAC scan. Like if your blood work says, well, there's a good chance, on average, for the average person, you might have plaque, go get a CAC scan. And we'll basically on the back end help people arrange to get that in the US. That's where this is all starting with America, with the United States. But basically just trying to boil down what's best known out there that seems to have evidence behind it and at least works for some people, right? Like a lot of these things won't work for all people. And or even something as simple as like, okay, if somebody wants to start statins, they're already completely sure, like, I'm sure I want to start statins. If you go to your doctor, they'll start you on a higher dose than maybe they should because they're not going to do this like personalized medicine cycle. They just don't have time. They're not going to test you for another year. So they just start you on the dose that's going to work for the average person, probably. Whereas, if you care about the side effects and everything else, what you really want to do is start at the lowest possible dose, see how that affects you. Does that get your lipids down? What does it do to your liver markers and all these other things? And so we kind of designed around a more holistic and careful approach, which allows people to ease into adding something to their life, whether it's a diet or a statin, or even like something like the opposite. Like maybe, I mean, there was this joke online, which I think has a lot of truth in it, like the Oreo versus statin thing for keto people, right?
Yeah.
Which I think makes a lot of, like, okay, maybe eating one Oreo a week has a higher effect than statin for people that are keto, right? So maybe that's the trade-off they want to do, like add back, 20 grams of carbs or whatever it is. So that's the kind of thing that we want to help people and help enable people to do and also guide them, right? So they don't have to go through like 100 hours of research each person and make their own decision if they don't want to. So we'll offer them some suggestions, and they can go down one of these paths and see what happens, and basically what we always do is we help them interpret the markers and know, like, okay, this is good, this is bad, and and say, well, typically, if you want to fix this, here's what you have to do. Here's a couple of options, and then people can go down one of these paths and actually try to make it work. So that's kind of the idea, and I think one big strength that Phil has is that he actually comes from the traditional. So we're in Boston here, right? So this is the capital of pharma, like the devil of medicine or whatever, right? But basically, Phil comes from the traditional world of like trying to get studies together where you get real efficacy out of drugs, and it's actually a very, very at least from the part that he played in it, in his career, it's very difficult and very rigorous, right? And so he really understands, looking at the data on different drugs and everything else, he's really deep in that and really understands what it means. And on the other hand, he's one of these people that's like obsessed with their health and optimizing it all the time. And so he kind of lives in both worlds, right? So he's both the monthly CiFox test taker and also kind of comes from pharma. And so I think that's been really helpful because he can look at the whole swath of everything out there and pull out things that for people that can be helpful. So I would say that's been really interesting, especially for me. It's like been a big learning experience working with him.
Yeah, that's excellent, Mike. And that's the whole idea, is to integrate all of the different sources of knowledge and try and integrate them into something that can represent any particular individual. And interesting you mentioned there, I remember I had a paper back, 10 years ago, and I shared it with a lot of people who had this question about side effects. And I said, look, if you want the statins, this was an actual RCT, and I think they had 80 milligram versus 10 milligram atorvastatin from memory. It's a long time ago. But there was a modest benefit to the statin arm versus placebo. But the 80 and 10 were almost superimposed. So you get way less side effect or potentially liver disruption, etc. And by the trial itself, you largely get the same benefit. And that's the tip of the iceberg of what's out there. So to pull it all together, I'd say have a token vegetarian, vegan type person as well. Be balanced, have a carnivore, have a keto, have the pharma quarter, and pull it all together in a fair and scientific way. It sounds excellent. But so this blueprint, this product, this is not there as such yet. It's early days. It's beta testing.
Yeah, I can talk a bit more about that. So it's already available like on our website. If you go, and we can post a link with this video, but if you go to, there's a heart health blueprints/heart health. It's in the top nav. So you can actually sign up to it. It's right now it's $99 a month, and that includes testing up to every month. So some people don't want to do testing monthly, so it's quarterly is the standard, and then you can test it every month as well. And then there's a whole bunch of things you can do, including lifestyle modifications, supplements for example, like supplements that will help you with your HbA1c or with your lipids. And then also you can go through, there's a telemedicine branch, so you can actually get, for example, like a low-dose statin or ezetimibe. There was actually recently an interesting self-experiment done by, I never pronounce his name correctly. It's the guy's popular on Twitter, Dom Agostino, I think, from University of Florida, or one of the
D'Agostino, yeah.
D'Agostino, yeah. So
Great guy.
he tried ezetimibe, which is like the cholesterol absorption blocking drug, and actually had very good results with it, which is interesting. So instead of trying to prevent your body from producing LDL, it actually just blocks the absorption of LDL from food, which is an interesting alternative. Usually they'll add it to statins. I mean, Phil can talk about this, but they usually add it to statins if the statins are not working well enough. But in some case, there's might be a trade-off of actually just using that. I don't know, Phil, maybe you can comment on it. But that's like another interesting option that we've discovered.
Yeah, I mean, this gets back to what you said, Ivor, like how we learn to use medicines in conjunction with lifestyle. Like, honestly, this is a field that's ripe for new knowledge. Let's just say this. So some of the examples you gave, which was the idea of the dose of the statin, we now know that the lowest dose of the statin is what actually gives you the biggest bang for the buck, right? And then as you raise the doses, there's incremental benefits in terms of the specific lowering of the lipid, in this case, ApoB or LDL-C, but ultimately there's always going to be trade-offs of benefit risk. And this is what we're always taught to think about. And it's not just with medicines, it's with lifestyle. There's always trade-offs of benefit versus the potential downsides. And the reality is with lifestyle, at least, the downsides are relatively, it all depends on the certain situation, minimal compared to the potential upside. And you can quickly see that within 2 weeks, 4 weeks as to whether this intervention is making a difference. Same with medicines. And you can make decisions as to whether you need to increase the dose of the diet or increase the dose of the medicine. And you can make these type of decisions if you have the data to guide it. And then as Mike's speaking, when it comes to medicine, the trials that we have to run are run on what we believe are the most, very self-selected patient populations to address a very specific question. But even those trials have a lot of heterogeneity that we simply can't control for. So learning how to combine drugs with diet, use a lifestyle alone, these are all open, unanswered questions. And to me, it gets back to this idea that the inputs of drugs, diet, genetics, these are the part that are complicated, and there's lots of varied opinion. The places where I say that we have the much more consensus about are those outputs of those biomarkers. And when I said in the beginning of this podcast that your book has aged well, when I went back and I looked at a lot of what you wrote about the value of simple ratios such as triglyceride to HDL and the value that brought, I think that is now there's more and more people are beginning to accept that, because as we stated, like the lipid itself, the lipid particle, while important, it can't be divorced with the role of insulin resistance, et cetera. And if you have the biomarkers at hand, which we do, we don't need any new higher technology. We have the biomarkers that can help us understand holistically what is going on in a human being. And that's what we're trying to offer, because I think that if you can help people understand that heart health is something that has to be approached from a holistic perspective, that is a great service that we can do, because I don't think that that's as well known to the general public. And then the second thing I would say is that the awareness is one aspect of it, but I think that people just aren't really testing the right biomarkers. Like if you go into a general primary care clinic, the use of fasting insulin, HOMA-IR, it's honestly, it's not being done. And it's such a simple test that can help identify not just diabetes, but pre-diabetes and even pre-diabetes, or whatever you want to call it. But the idea is you have to start shifting this thought process to these biomarkers can identify problems long before they become diagnosed diseases, if you will. And I think that this is kind of what we are looking to do at CiFox. And we think that the data that we can generate, this is another interesting aspect, is by collecting the frequency of these data. A lot of these biomarkers haven't been used in this fashion, right? They're tested once a year, if that. But collecting the frequency and helping to try to understand how these biomarkers can be valuable is another, is something that we can do with the data that we're now collecting, because we're also, with the user's permission, collecting data from them in terms of their backgrounds, their health, and their progress. And so we can start to tie these things together and understand how interventions, whether it's lifestyle or medicines, are making impact. So there's a lot of dimensions. And like I say, this is a beta launch, and we have the foundation in place, and we're looking for advice, as you gave us some in terms of trying to have a diversified advisory panel, but we're constantly looking for advice from the real experts to help us understand, and the customers too, to be honest with you, what they need. We're taking guesses at what customers need, but ultimately we'll find out what they need, and hopefully we'll be able to provide that information to them.
Super stuff, Phil. And yeah, absolutely. The customer base I've been provided so much fascinating information from people. I'll just give one tiny example. I spoke extensively on gamma glutamyl transferase, the liver enzyme. And then a guy came to me and he had a really high value for many, many years, nearly 10 years. And his doctor kept suggesting he must be drinking too much alcohol, but he didn't drink. So he's very frustrated. And then he found out through intensive personal research that it was related to SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. He had a subclinical or unnoticed problem with his gut. He got that fixed, I think with special antibiotics, and for the first time in 10 years, his GGT went right back to normal. And I almost didn't believe him, and I searched specifically for that and found 2 or 3 papers elucidating the mechanisms. So like, again, even customers can come up with great information. So it sounds like a great system, but you're very early on in the process. I'll put the links to the website there. There'll be a lot of people, I'm sure, interested in checking it out. But it's really testing through to the full backup of the expert knowledge, the integration of all the different, even individualized ways people might tackle the results that are less than optimum.
So Ivor, yeah, I think that GGT is a perfect example of a biomarker that we honestly probably aren't using to its fullest extent. But there's other biomarkers like ALT that we test for quite commonly, but oftentimes our healthcare system will not do anything about unless it's wildly out of range. We know that fluctuating ALT levels between normal and abnormal can often indicate evidence of fat in the liver. And so at CiFox, we know that metabolic disease can present in different ways in different users. And by helping the users understand that these changes should not be ignored, we can help them implement the appropriate solution, whether it's changes in diet, as an example, and then be able to see whether or not this has an impact in the case of a slightly elevated ALT.
Yeah, the way we're structuring it is basically you have the first 3 months, it's range finding, so trying to find something that'll help you. And then the next 6 months is, okay, can we maintain in this state, right? And then you do another check-in. I mean, you're getting tested all along, but the goal is in the first 3 months to get really good results and alter the person's biomarkers to where they can more try to maintain them rather than improve them, right? So you get them to a point where you're happy in 3 months. That's our goal. So we have some alpha users that we've been working with for the last 3 to 6 months on this kind of improvement, and it seems like with the types of things that we're suggesting, 3 months is a good timeline because you can try something for a month, see if it's working, adjust it, and so on. So 3 months gives you like 3 cycles approximately, like 2 to 3 if you include the time it takes to do the first test. So that's kind of the idea. You get your 3-month optimization, and then you get maintenance for 6 months, and then maybe another 3-month optimization, and so on. And that fits pretty well into like the realistic rhythm of people's lives, right? So you could probably make these changes faster, but you have, if that's your only priority. But we're kind of trying to meet people in where they are, which is everything else they have to do. I mean, I think one interesting mind kind of like shift in thinking that I've had since we last talked is in general, I was already having the sense, why is longevity becoming so popular, right? I think one reason is that the more you look around, if you just watch, I mean, I think this is more like a political statement or something, but it's interesting. Like this is more like this is more for fun, but I think it's interesting. I'm curious to hear your opinion of this. Like, when they talk about AI, they say, okay, once we have a like really good AI, we're going to live in post scarcity. So meaning like, there will be no material scarcity, right? I always want, I'm beginning to wonder, like, if we already live in post scarcity, like, how would we know? right? So for example, like, have you ever seen the pictures of the Chinese bike share programs where they were all competing, and a lot of them like went out of business, and then there were enormous piles of bikes, like, really like football fields, 10 bikes deep of bicycles from the Chinese like street. You've never seen this, I guess.
No, no.
So anyway, I lived in China for a while, so I saw all these bikes. They were just putting like tons of bikes on the street, like competing for bike share customers, like growing their networks. And eventually, a lot of them failed. There were just these enormous piles of bikes. And I think there's a lot of evidence of things like this, where like the actual there's not like America is a net exporter of oil, for example, also, which is interesting, right? So everybody thought there would be peak oil, but actually we're producing more oil than ever. And there's all these like material inputs that are actually not limited. And when they are limited, it's often by choice. Like, we didn't build nuclear power plants for the last 40 years, so we're kind of limited, and like electricity costs are high, but it's totally by choice, right? So in that kind of world where like most material like limitations are by choice, the thing that's actually limited is health, right? Like that is the one thing that's actually limited by nature. Like we could build, probably we could cover much of, I don't know, like half of Ireland in skyscrapers if we wanted to, right? Like if you look at Shenzhen, it's like, it went from pig farms to skyscrapers in like 30 years, and the whole place, it's an enormous place full of skyscrapers. It's like if we had the will, like if people wanted this kind of thing, you could build tons of skyscrapers everywhere, right? But it's an interesting question why we don't do things like that, right? Like why aren't we, building 1,000 nuclear power plants right now? But the point that I think comes home to me is like the one thing that's really not that's still scarce, and we're about to be in a place where intelligence is not scarce. Like you can open a faucet. I mean, it's already true, right? Like you can open a faucet and just words come out of it, which is crazy, right? Like it used to be a big deal to be able to write like 7 paragraphs on a topic, right? Now it's like it's being dumped out in truckloads, right? But the one thing that's still scarce is literally, is health, right? That we have not solved that. So I think it's one of the most interesting problems, like how to turn that into something that's not scarce, right? And
Yeah.
I think for that reason, it's actually very fun to be working on this problem, because it's really not solved. It's not just a matter of like, oh, they won't let us make people healthy, right? Like it's not like the nuclear power plants. Like engineers know how to build the power plants. It's just people don't want them, right? Like they think it's risky or whatever. I
Politically,
mean, yeah, like more or less, we could build a lot of them, right? So it's in many ways it's a matter of will, like social will. But I think for health, there is a bit of social will there for sure. But I think in many ways, it's just not a solved problem yet. So I think in that way, it's actually very fun, and I think that's why it attracts a lot of engineers, actually, like yourself, like our friend Lee, and so on. It attracts a lot of engineers because it's such a fun and unsolved problem, actually.
yeah.
So anyway.
It's the No, you're absolutely right, Mike. It's the perfect complex problem that complex problem solvers would be drawn to, and because of the personal benefit. But you're right, people have much more now than they realize. Maybe they are beginning to realize it now. They have it so good. And there's not just the kind of longevity to the date you die, but the health span. And people, I think, are more and more beginning to fear, because in the last 20, 30, 40 years, people are living as long as they did, maybe a little more, that's finished now. But the quality of life is dreadful, with diabetes, type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, that is being called, Parkinson's, all the cancers are rising. So there's all this threatening ill health and bad quality of life for your final decades. So I think people are instinctively want to remove that risk from themselves, as well as the end date of their actual death. I notice as well, my daughter and sons, 5 kids here, I'm seeing a huge
You have
amount of
5 kids.
interest. Yeah,
Oh,
5
wow,
kids.
awesome.
Hey,
Okay.
hey, that's my
Are
immortality,
you
right?
repopulating the islands, or?
Well, it was kind of a Celtic tiger thing, and my wife is very focused on traditional big family type dynamics. And anyway, we are here now.
Yeah, I'm
But
I'm on number 2 actually, as of 2 months ago. So I'm also
oh,
I'm
congratulations!
on your tail, but a little
Yeah,
little behind.
you have a ways to go. But you know what? They are very much, my sons particularly, and lots of their friends, they're beginning to be aware of keto. I was amazed, like, because usually, the people around you aren't aware of keto. It's almost niche. And but they're doing keto, and they're doing the gym a lot. And there's a kind of a personal not vanity, but maybe it's the modern generation is a little more vain or self-focused. There's an element of that coming through at the next generation as well. So I think there's a lot of vectors along with the one you mentioned. There's a lot of roads leading to the new Rome of achieving health span and, to a degree, longevity and staying out of the medical system. The hospitals are a disaster in Ireland, and I guess across the world, with waiting lists and queues. There's another incentive there. You don't want to be caught up in that mess. You want to keep yourself out of it. So the time is ripe, I think.
One thing to add to your comment, like we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, what we're trying to solve for at CiFox, which is to turn off this fire hose of chronic disease, and we didn't define it, but you did, which is, even though we're starting with heart health because we know that that's what a lot of people gravitate towards. That's what they hear about. But as you described, this is more than just heart health. This, the drivers of heart, or let's just say cardiovascular disease, as we described, which is disruption in our metabolic systems, chronic inflammation. These are the same drivers for neurodegenerative disease, as you said, risk of cancer, obesity. It's all the same. It's just, in each of us, it's going to display itself differently. But we focused on heart health because, again, that's certainly something everyone has their attention on. But this isn't just about heart health. This is really about thinking in a systems-wide approach, and the solutions that we're trying to offer aren't just about trying to improve your heart health. It's what you just said. It's improving health span in general. And, that's what we're hoping to achieve as well, is to realize that these are not separate entities.
Yeah, no, for sure, Phil. And if you strive for heart health, you reduce insulin resistance, reduce your GGT and your aminotransferases, liver enzymes, and do yada, 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 and do all those things. I mean, you've knocked your cancer risk on the head too, and the neurodegenerative, which a lot of people really fear, and rightly so. I have a case with my mother actually now has a severe issue with that, and it's incredibly impactful on the whole family, and it will run for years and years and years in the latter part of life. It's an awful shame. So yeah, couldn't agree more, guys. Are there any other key points to add? I know you wanted to keep it tight today, the conversation.
I think we covered most of it. I mean, the main thing is just, one thing, like, just for the people watching this, what we're very interested in is, we'll provide like a steep discount code for people to try this thing out because it's in beta. And we're really interested in people that want to try it and kind of give us feedback and basically allow us, in a way to work together on building this. And then the benefit of that is, first of all, you get a lot of extra attention that we won't be able to provide. Once we get past 1,000 people, we're not going to be able to provide the same level of customization, right? We're going to have to make it more rigid. But also you'll benefit, helping us build this out. You might end up benefiting millions of people, right? Because our goal is to make it very scalable, very automated, a lot of software enabled stuff, and that'll allow us to scale it to really large number of people and make a lot of people healthier. So I think it's an opportunity also to contribute to kind of solving this problem, which affects everyone around us almost. So anyway, that's kind of the how do I call it? Like the pitch of the mission, right? I think it's a good mission also, beyond just the benefit you get as an individual from trying it out.
Yeah, and the personal benefits you'll get from anything like this are going to far outweigh the cost in any case. That's a personal given. But you hear that, everyone, now? It's a call to action of sorts. So be the change that we clearly so desperately need in the world, and help others too. This is what it's all about. Your health is your wealth. And you heard it here. Well, not first, but you heard it here for sure. So, hey, thanks a lot, guys, and I'll get this out, and I'll put links down below, as you say, if you have a discount link for followers and people watching this. That'll be fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Ivor.
Thanks, Ivor. It's great to connect.
Well, guys, Mike and Phil are certainly making all efforts to revolutionize the world of chronic disease risk. And the link is down in the description box or the first comment below if you'd like to avail of the significant discount and get involved with the beta program. So good luck.